I used to think silence was peaceful, the kind of thing people longed for after a long day, a quiet room, a calm mind, a soft retreat from the noise of the world. But silence could be a weapon. It could be a slow poison that seeped into everything, eroding a relationship piece by piece without a single harsh word spoken. I used to think yelling meant something was broken, but I learned that silence was what truly shattered things. Because when someone stops yelling, stops fighting, stops trying, that's when you know you've already lost them. She sat across from me, her fingers wrapped around a half-empty glass of wine, the candle on the table flickering low, the wax pooling at its base. There were 2 plates in front of us, food untouched, long since gone cold. I had walked in late, as I had too many nights before, expecting the usual, maybe a tired glance, a sigh, a question I could answer with some half-hearted excuse. But tonight was different. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even disappointed. She was just quiet, too quiet, and that terrified me more than anything. I pulled out the chair, sat down, cleared my throat like I was about to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to fix the thick air between us, the distance that had stretched so far I wasn't sure if I could reach her anymore. I picked up my fork, pushed the food around, the silence pressing in so heavy it made my chest ache. Then she finally spoke. I used to think you not yelling meant we were okay. She set her glass down, rolling the stem between her fingers as she looked at me, her voice eerily calm. I thought it meant we understood each other, that we didn't have to fight like other couples did, that we had something better. She let out a small, humorless laugh and shook her head. But I was wrong, wasn't I? I swallowed hard. I didn't know why I couldn't speak, why my throat felt tight, why I suddenly felt like a guilty man sitting across from his judge, awaiting a verdict. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't making accusations. She was just saying things I wasn't ready to hear. You don't say much anymore, she continued, tilting her head slightly, watching me like I was some puzzle she had been trying to solve for too long. But then again, neither do I. I opened my mouth, but before I could even think of what to say, she held up a hand, stopping me. Not tonight, she said softly. I don't want excuses. I don't want another half-hearted promise that things will get better. I just want to know one thing. She leaned forward slightly, and for the first time in a long time, I realized how exhausted she looked, not just tired, not just worn out, but drained, like whatever fight she had left was slipping away, and once it was gone, there would be no getting it back. Do you even care? She asked. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a plea. It was just a question, but somehow, it was worse than anything else she could have said. Of course, I cared. Didn't I? The answer was so obvious, so easy, yes. Yes, I cared. But the words wouldn't come out. Because caring wasn't about what you felt. It was about what you did. And if I really, truly cared, then why had I let things get to this point? Why had I stopped trying? She exhaled through her nose, slow, patient, like she had already expected my silence. And then she stood up. She picked up her plate, her glass, and turned toward the sink, and something inside me panicked because suddenly I felt it. Felt the weight of everything we had been avoiding. Felt the walls we had built between us. Felt the chasm that had formed so gradually we had never noticed until it was too late. I pushed my chair back roughly, stood up, the scrape of wood against tile the only sound in the room. Wait, I blurted out, my voice hoarse, unsure, but she didn't turn around, didn't stop. I don't want to fight, she said simply, placing her plate in the sink, rinsing it as if this was just another night, as if nothing had just cracked open between us. And you don't want to talk. That's not true. The words came out too fast, almost desperate. She turned off the water, set the glass beside the plate, and finally turned to look at me. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't accusing. They were just tired. Then say something, she said. I opened my mouth, and for the first time, I felt completely and utterly empty. There were things I could have said, things I should have said, but I had let them pile up for so long that now, when it mattered most, I had nothing left. She studied me for a long moment, waiting, giving me the space to step forward, to bridge the gap, to fight for her, for us, for whatever was left between us. But I didn't move. I didn't say anything. And that's when I knew. She had already made her decision. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. She had already started letting go. She wiped her hands on the dish towel, gave me one last look, just one, quiet, final, and then she walked past me, disappearing down the hall to our bedroom, closing the door behind her. I stayed there, standing in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where she had been. And for the first time in my life, I understood what true fear felt like. Not the fear of anger. Not the fear of loss. The fear of silence. I didn't go after her. I stood there, hands gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white, heart pounding in my ears, the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest like something solid, something immovable. I should have followed her. I should have opened the bedroom door, sat down beside her, told her that I cared, that I still wanted this, that I still wanted her. But the words wouldn't come, and maybe that was the problem. Maybe that had always been the problem. I had spent years thinking that not fighting meant we were fine, that silence meant we understood each other, that walking away from an argument was better than throwing ourselves into it. But now I was realizing that silence wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the slow decay of everything we had built. I had mistaken peace for neglect, and now all that was left between us was an empty, echoing space where love used to be. The bedroom door stayed shut. I waited, expecting her to come back out, to say something else, to give me another chance to fix this, but she didn't. And the longer I stood there, the more I realized she wasn't going to. I sat down at the table again, staring at my plate, at the food she had made for me, the meal she had cooked, probably hoping, maybe for the last time, that I would come home early enough to eat it with her. I had done this too many times, walked in late, offered weak apologies, acted as if there would always be another night, another chance, as if time wasn't running out. But time was running out. Maybe it already had. I forced myself to take a bite, chewing slowly, tasting nothing. I wasn't hungry, but I ate anyway because it felt like some small act of penance, some acknowledgement that I saw what she had done, what she had tried, what I had ignored. When I finished, I stood, picked up my plate, rinsed it in the sink, and turned off the lights before heading to the bedroom. The door was locked. I stared at it, my pulse kicking up, my hand hovering just over the handle as if touching it would change something, as if I could undo everything just by wanting to. She had never locked the door before. Not once. Not in all the years we had been together. I knocked, soft at first, then again, firmer this time. "Can we talk?" My voice sounded foreign, too small, too uncertain, like I had lost the right to ask. No response. I pressed my forehead against the wood, exhaling slowly. I know I've been distant. My voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of the house, it felt too loud, like an intrusion. I know you're tired of waiting for me to wake up and see you. But I do. I see you. Nothing. My throat tightened, frustration curling around the edges of my patience, but I swallowed it down because this wasn't about me, wasn't about my guilt or my need for her to fix things for me. I had spent too long expecting her to meet me halfway when I hadn't even been willing to take the first step. I pressed my palm against the door, fingers splayed, wishing I could feel her warmth on the other side, some proof that she was still there, that she hadn't already slipped away completely. "I love you," I said finally. Still silence. I let my hand fall away, stepping back, nodding to myself like that small movement might hold me together. Then I turned, walked to the couch, and lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the nothingness that stretched between us. The next morning, she was already up before me. The smell of coffee drifted through the house, and for a moment, I let myself believe things were normal, that last night had been just another quiet night, that we could go back to pretending. But when I walked into the kitchen, she was dressed for work, standing by the sink, rinsing out her mug, moving with a kind of precision that made my stomach twist. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I'll be late tonight." The words were casual, normal, but something about them sent a prickle of unease down my spine. I frowned. "Late?" She set the mug on the rack, drying her hands before finally turning to face me. "Yeah, I have some things to take care of." A tightness settled in my chest. She had never been good at lying, and this wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. "What things?" I asked, my voice careful, testing. For the first time in a long time, she hesitated. "Just things," she said finally, and the way she said it, the way she avoided my gaze, made something cold settle in my gut. I should have pushed. I should have asked. But the space between us felt too fragile, like if I pressed too hard, she would shatter, or worse, she would disappear completely. So I nodded. "Okay." She gave me a small, polite smile, the kind of smile you give a stranger, then reached for her bag. "I'll see you later." And then she was gone. I sat at the table, staring at the empty spot where she had stood, the air still carrying the faint scent of her perfume. My hands clenched into fists, my mind racing, because something wasn't right, something was shifting. And if I didn't do something now, if I didn't figure out how to reach her, I was going to lose her. But the worst part? I wasn't sure if I already had. She didn't come home late that night. She didn't come home at all. I waited. At first, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she had gone out with coworkers, stayed at a friend's place, wanted space to clear her head. But the longer I sat in the dim living room, the clock ticking away the hours, the deeper the unease settled in my stomach. I called her once. No answer. I texted. Nothing. By midnight, I was pacing. By 2, I was staring at my phone, willing it to light up, willing her to send even the smallest acknowledgement that she hadn't just disappeared from my life without a word. But there was nothing, only silence pressing against my ribs, a familiar, suffocating weight I could no longer ignore. I barely slept, dozing off in uneven stretches on the couch, jolting awake every time a car passed outside, every time the pipes groaned in the walls, every time I thought I heard the sound of the door unlocking. But morning came, and she was still gone. At 6, I tried calling again. Straight to voicemail. By 8, I was getting dressed, heart hammering as I grabbed my keys. I wasn't the type to chase after someone, had never been the one to make dramatic gestures or force my way into conversations she wasn't ready to have. But this wasn't just a bad night. This was different. I drove to her office first, trying to ignore the way my hands tightened around the wheel, the way my mind kept cycling through worst-case scenarios. She was there. She had to be. I parked too fast, nearly slamming my door as I strode into the building, ignoring the receptionist's wary glance as I made my way to her floor. But the moment I stepped out of the elevator, I knew. Her desk was empty. Not just empty, cleared out. The small framed photo that had once sat by her monitor was gone. The books, the pens, even the little notepad where she used to scribble half-legible reminders to herself. It was all gone. A slow, heavy dread sank into my bones. Can I help you? I turned, coming face to face with a woman I had seen before, one of her coworkers, someone she had mentioned in passing but never really talked about. She looked cautious, her gaze flicking to the empty desk like she already knew why I was here. I'm looking for her, I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. She didn't come home last night. She's not answering her phone. The woman hesitated. What? My pulse was in my throat now, an ugly, erratic beat. She resigned, she said finally, shifting on her feet. Yesterday afternoon. Cleaned out her desk before she left. Everything inside me stilled. That's not possible, I said, though the words felt weak the moment they left my mouth. She gave me a look that was almost sympathetic. I don't know what's going on, but she was quiet. Different. Like she'd already made up her mind about something. My stomach clenched. I have to go, I muttered, turning before she could say anything else, barely hearing her call after me as I pushed back into the elevator, my breath coming too fast, my thoughts running too loud. She had quit. Walked away from her job, from her routine, from everything without telling me. Without telling anyone. I tried calling again as I made my way back to the car, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. It went straight to voicemail. Again. I drove without thinking, without knowing exactly where I was going, my body moving on autopilot as my mind tried to make sense of what was happening. I checked the places that made sense first, her favorite coffee shop, the bookstore she loved, even the grocery store, hoping maybe she had just needed time, space, something I could still salvage. But she wasn't there. Then, without fully realizing it, I was pulling into the driveway of her sister's house. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping out, making my way to the door, knocking sharply. A pause. Then the sound of movement. Her sister opened the door, and the look on her face told me everything before she even spoke. You know. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even surprised. I swallowed, my throat dry. Where is she? She sighed, crossing her arms, leaning against the doorframe in a way that made it clear she wasn't planning to let me in. I can't tell you that. I clenched my jaw. She didn't come home last night. She quit her job. She's not answering her phone. She left, and she didn't even. I stopped, inhaling sharply, forcing my voice steady. Just tell me if she's safe. She studied me for a long moment, something unreadable passing through her expression before she finally gave a small nod. She's safe. It should have been a relief. It should have let me breathe again. But all it did was make the knot in my chest tighten. She told me not to tell you, her sister said quietly. The words landed hard. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to meet her gaze. Why? She hesitated, then sighed, shaking her head. Because she needed to do this for herself. Because she didn't want you to try to talk her out of it. I stepped back, the weight of it hitting me all at once, pressing into my ribs, making it hard to stand still. She's leaving, isn't she? I asked, already knowing the answer. Her sister didn't say anything. I nodded slowly, rubbing a hand over my face, trying to hold on to something, anything that made sense. I don't get it, I muttered, more to myself than to her. She never said anything. She never yelled, never fought, never even told me she was at that point. Her sister gave a quiet, almost sad laugh. No, she said. She didn't. And that's the problem, isn't it? I looked at her then, really looked, but there was nothing else she was going to say. She wasn't going to help me fix this. Because maybe it wasn't fixable anymore. I turned away before I could say something I'd regret, before I could ask again, before I could beg. Because this wasn't a fight. It wasn't even a goodbye. She had already left. I just hadn't noticed until now. I drove without thinking, past streets I knew, past places we had been together, past the life we had built without realizing it had already started crumbling beneath us. The roads blurred together, my thoughts louder than the engine, drowning out everything except the singular, growing certainty that I had let her slip through my fingers, not just last night, not just this week, but for years. I kept telling myself she wasn't the type to leave without warning, that she would never just walk away without saying something. But that was a lie, wasn't it? She had been saying something, over and over, in the only way she ever had. She had been quiet, patient, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to try. I stopped at a red light, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I could still turn this around. I had to. She wouldn't just vanish. She wouldn't just cut me out completely. She wasn't like that. Except maybe I didn't know who she was anymore. Or maybe I had never really known her at all. The light changed, and I turned sharply, heading back home. Because maybe, just maybe, she would be there. Maybe she needed time to think. Maybe she would walk through that door, and I would finally be ready. Finally say all the things I should have said when it still mattered. But when I pulled into the driveway, the house was just as I had left it. The blinds were still drawn, the porch light still off from the night before, the same heavy stillness pressing against the walls like the house itself knew what was happening. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the front door, half expecting it to swing open, half expecting to see her standing there, arms crossed, telling me I was too late. But it stayed closed. Inside, everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The air was different. Hollow. I walked down the hall, into her bedroom, stopping just inside the doorway. Her closet was half empty. Not completely, not in the dramatic way someone packs up in anger, but in the quiet way someone leaves when they've had too much time to think. A few missing shirts. A pair of shoes gone. The small jewelry box she always kept on the dresser was missing. The drawers, slightly ajar, were just empty enough to be noticeable, just enough to make my stomach turn. She had planned this. She hadn't just left in the middle of the night, hadn't just made a split-second decision. She had been waiting for the moment I would finally realize what she had been trying to tell me without words, waiting to see if I would wake up in time to stop it. But I hadn't. And now, it was done. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand over my face, staring at the floor. I had spent so much time convincing myself that not fighting meant we were okay, that as long as we weren't screaming at each other, as long as we weren't throwing accusations, things were fine. But what I had never understood, what I should have understood, was that silence wasn't proof that everything was good. It was proof that everything had already been lost. I reached for my phone again, scrolling through old texts, old messages, trying to find the exact moment she had started pulling away. But it wasn't there. Because it hadn't happened all at once. It had happened so gradually I had mistaken it for normal. It had happened in the nights when she had cooked dinner and I had come home late. In the mornings when I had kissed her forehead instead of looking her in the eye. In the days when she had been quiet, when she had given me space, when she had let the distance grow instead of forcing me to close it. And I had let her do it. I had let the love between us rot in silence. The phone vibrated in my hand, a single notification flashing across the screen. A message. My pulse jumped, my fingers moving faster than my thoughts as I opened it, barely breathing. It wasn't from her. It was from her sister. She's okay. Don't come looking for her. She needs time. I stared at the message, my vision blurring for a second. She hadn't even told me herself. She had gone through someone else, put that barrier between us because she didn't trust me not to pull her back into something she had already walked away from. I swallowed hard, setting the phone down, staring at the wall. She was gone. And for the first time, I didn't know if she was ever coming back. The days stretched. I stopped counting them. She didn't come back, and I didn't go after her. Not because I didn't want to, but because I finally understood what she had been trying to tell me without saying anything at all. She had spent so long waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to change, waiting for something, anything, that would prove she wasn't alone in this. And I had done nothing. So now it was my turn to wait. The first few nights were the hardest. The bed felt too big, the house too quiet. I kept expecting to hear her footsteps in the hallway, the sound of her soft exhale as she lay down beside me, the rustling of sheets as she shifted in her sleep. But there was nothing. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, retracing every moment that had led us here, every missed sign, every small moment I had let pass without realizing it was one more crack in the foundation. I went back to work, went through the motions, but everything felt off. The people around me were the same, the routines unchanged, but I wasn't. I caught myself checking my phone more times than I wanted to admit, waiting for a message that never came. She had blocked me. I tried calling once, just to hear her voice, but it went straight to voicemail. My number had been cut off from her world as if I had never existed in it. Her sister didn't respond to my messages either. I sent only two. The first was simple. Is she okay? No answer. The second was longer. Tell her I'm sorry. Not just for now, but for everything. For the years I wasn't listening. For the things I didn't say. For all the times she needed me to see her, and I didn't. Just tell her that. Days passed. Then weeks. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way the house felt emptier, not just because she wasn't there, but because I had never really made it ours. She had. The books on the shelves, the small plants on the windowsills, the soft blanket draped over the couch that I never used, but she always did. The kitchen felt foreign without her moving through it. The bathroom sink felt too clean without her things scattered along the counter. I had lived here for years, but now, for the first time, it felt like a place I was just passing through. I thought about selling the house. The thought came and went, circling back every time I walked into a room and felt the weight of what wasn't there. But selling it wouldn't change the fact that I had let her go long before she ever left. It was almost 2 months before I saw her again. I wasn't expecting it. I had convinced myself that maybe I never would, that she had moved on, found a new place, started a life without me in it. But then I saw her. Not in some dramatic, planned moment. Just at a cafe. She was sitting by the window, a cup of tea in front of her, a book open in her hands. She looked different. Not in an obvious way, not in a way that most people would notice, but I did. There was a lightness to her, something I hadn't seen in a long time. She was alone, but she didn't look lonely. I stood on the sidewalk, staring through the glass, torn between going inside and turning around. She didn't see me. I had the advantage. I could walk away, leave her in peace, pretend I had never been here. But I couldn't. Not after everything. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest, the air too thick, the noise of the cafe muffled as if I were moving underwater. She still didn't notice me. I walked to the counter, ordered a coffee, and turned, hesitating before making my way toward her table. She looked up at the last second, her eyes meeting mine. I saw the flicker of recognition, the moment of hesitation, the unreadable expression that followed. But she didn't look away. Hey, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She stared at me for a long moment, then closed her book and set it aside. Hey. I wasn't sure what to say. The last time we had spoken, it hadn't been a conversation. It had been silence. She gestured toward the empty chair. Go ahead. I sat. I didn't know why she was letting me, why she wasn't standing up and leaving, why she was giving me this moment. But I wasn't going to waste it. I took a breath, steadying myself. I know you don't owe me anything, I said, forcing myself to meet her gaze, to let her see the things I had never let her see before. And I know you're better now. I can see that. But I need to say this, and you can listen or you can walk away, and I won't stop you. But I need to say it. She didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. I should have fought for you, I admitted, my hands tightening around my coffee cup. I should have noticed when you started slipping away, when you stopped trying to make me listen, when you started waiting for me to figure it out on my own. I thought silence meant we were okay, but it didn't. It meant you had already stopped believing we could fix it. And I let you. I let you sit there in that silence, and I never once asked what it was doing to you. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. I exhaled, shaking my head. I was selfish. And I know that now. I kept thinking there would be more time, that as long as we weren't fighting, everything would work itself out. But I was wrong. Silence doesn't fix things. It kills them. She didn't answer right away. She sat back in her chair, studying me like she was seeing me for the first time, or maybe like she was trying to figure out if she still recognized the man sitting in front of her. I waited for you, she said finally, her voice steady, but not unkind. For years. I waited for you to see me, to hear me, to understand what I needed from you. And you never did. I loved you. But I couldn't keep loving someone who made me feel alone. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I know. She looked down, tracing the rim of her cup with her finger. I don't regret leaving. I felt my chest tighten, but I nodded again. You shouldn't. She looked back up at me then, something unreadable in her expression. Then why are you here? I took a slow breath. Because I needed to say this. And because I needed you to know that I hear you now. Even if it's too late. She didn't answer right away. Then, finally, she gave a small nod. Okay. We sat there for a moment, the silence between us no longer heavy, no longer sharp. Just there. And maybe that was enough. She glanced at her watch, then back at me. I should go. I didn't try to stop her. She stood, grabbed her book, and hesitated for just a second. Take care of yourself. I let out a slow breath, offering a small, bittersweet smile. You too. And then she walked away, and this time, I knew better than to follow.